Rome, January 897 AD. You are a young church deacon and you have just been handed the worst job in the history of the church. Inside the Great Lateran Basilica, the highest court of the most powerful institution on earth has assembled for a trial. The charges are serious: perjury, ambition, and breaking the sacred laws of the church. The judge is the Pope himself. But when you look across the courtroom at the defendant, something is very wrong. The defendant is not moving. The defendant is not breathing. The defendant has been dead for 9 months, and your job is to crouch behind his rotting corpse and speak for it. This is not a legend. It actually happened. It was written down as it unfolded, and the church spent the next 1,000 years wishing the world would forget it. History gave it a name: the Cadaver Synod. So how does the holiest office in Christendom end up dragging a dead pope out of his grave and putting him on trial? To understand that, you have to understand what being pope actually meant in the year 897. Forget everything you picture when you hear the word pope. This is not a gentle old man waving to pilgrims from a balcony. In the 9th century, the papacy was the richest prize in Europe and one of the deadliest jobs in it. Charlemagne's great empire had shattered, and every warlord in Italy now wanted the one thing only a pope could hand out: legitimacy. Get a pope to crown you emperor, and your family was set for generations. Back the wrong side, and you might not survive the year. In the 60 years around this story, there were more than 20 different popes. Very few of them died of old age. Enter Formosus. By the standards of the time, he was one of the most capable men ever to wear the crown. A famous missionary, a brilliant diplomat, respected even by people who hated him. He was also ambitious in an age when ambition got you killed. As Pope, Formosus was trapped between two armies. On one side stood the House of Spoleto, the local Italian strongmen, who had bullied their way into an imperial coronation and treated Rome like private property. On the other stood Arnulf, king of the East Franks, far away beyond the Alps. Formosus made his choice. He secretly wrote to Arnulf and begged him to invade Italy and free Rome. Arnulf marched south, took the city, and a grateful Formosus crowned him emperor in St. Peter's. The plan worked perfectly for about 3 months. Then, marching to crush Spoleto once and for all, Arnulf suddenly collapsed with a paralysis, probably a stroke, and his great army turned around and went home. And in April of 896, at around 80 years old, Formosus died quietly in his own bed before anyone could lay a hand on him. With Arnulf gone, the House of Spoleto came roaring back into Rome, furious and hunting for a traitor to punish. The man they found on the papal throne was Stephen VI, hot-tempered, owned by Spoleto, and in the judgment of many historians, not entirely sane. There was just one problem. The traitor they wanted was already dead and buried. For any normal man, that would have been the end of it. Stephen was not a normal man. In January of 897, Pope Stephen ordered the tomb of Formosus opened. The body, 9 months dead, was lifted out and carried into the Great Hall of the Lateran. There, servants dressed the corpse from head to toe in full papal vestments, the golden robes, the cope, the crown. They propped him upright on a throne, facing the judges. Bishops filed in and took their seats, some horrified, some too afraid to object. Notaries readied their pens to take down the dead man's testimony, and because church law demanded that every defendant be allowed to answer the charges, a teenage deacon was ordered to kneel behind the corpse and speak in its voice. That deacon is you. History was about to make you the lawyer for a dead pope. What followed was less a trial and more a public breakdown. Chroniclers describe Pope Stephen screaming at the corpse, mocking it, demanding it explain itself. "Why did you usurp the apostolic seat?" he bellowed at the dead man. Behind the throne, the deacon whispered back. The only safe answer there was, "I was wrong." The verdict surprised absolutely no one. Guilty on every single charge. The court declared that Formosus had never legally been pope at all. Every decree he had signed was annulled. Every priest he had ordained was stripped of office. And here is the twisted genius of it. Stephen himself had been made a bishop by Formosus. So if Formosus was never really pope, Stephen's awkward past conveniently vanished with him. Then came the sentence. First, the vestments were torn off the body. Then the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers a pope uses to bless, were hacked off. What was left was dressed in peasant rags, dragged through the streets of Rome, and dumped in a common grave for foreigners. And even that was not enough, because days later, the body was dug up again, hauled to a bridge, and thrown into the Tiber River. If Stephen expected Rome to cheer, he had badly misread his city. Downstream, a monk pulled the battered corpse out of the river and hid it. Almost immediately, the rumors began. The dead pope's body, people whispered, was working miracles. Then, around this same time, the Lateran Basilica itself, the very courtroom, was shaken by an earthquake and collapsed from altar to doors. To the average Roman, heaven's verdict on the trial could not have been clearer. The city turned on its pope. By summer, a mob had stormed the palace. Stephen was dragged from the throne and stripped of his vestments, the exact treatment he had ordered for the corpse. They threw him into a cell, and a few weeks later he was strangled in the dark. The judge had outlived his own verdict by barely half a year. What happened next tells you everything about the century. The next pope fished Formosus back out of disgrace. He had the body recovered, redressed in vestments, and solemnly reburied in St. Peter's with full honours. That pope reigned for exactly 20 days. The one after him formally annulled the Cadaver Synod, burned its records, and banned the trial of any dead person forever. Problem solved? Not quite. Because 7 years later the throne fell to Sergius III, a man who had sat in the audience at the Cadaver Synod as a young cleric, and loved it. Sergius reinstated the guilty verdict, wrote a glowing epitaph for Stephen's tomb, and, according to later accounts, had the corpse condemned all over again. If you have lost count, that one body had now been buried at least 4 separate times. Being dead, it turns out, was no protection from 9th century politics. So let's total it up. One corpse, tried by one pope, rehabilitated by the next, avenged by a mob, condemned again by a third, all in less than 10 years. The Cadaver Synod is the moment historians point to as rock bottom for the medieval papacy. The decades that followed were so violent and so corrupt that historians gave them a nickname, the Dark Century. Popes would be imprisoned, suffocated, and murdered by rivals as a matter of routine. But something from that January day did stick. The ban held, never again would the church put a corpse on trial. It remains, to this day, one of the very few rules of the year 897 that has never been broken. As for you, the teenage deacon, history never even bothered to record your name. You knelt behind a rotting corpse in borrowed robes and whispered answers for a dead man, while the most powerful people in Christendom screamed over your head. And when it was over, you simply vanished back into the crowd of history. So whatever your job throws at you this week, remember the deacon of the Cadaver Synod. It could be worse. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe.